Asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritam gamaya shanti shanti shanti. Namaskar and a very good evening to our distinguished guests and valued member of the audience. It is with great pleasure that I welcome you to this year's Dr. Biren Memorial Lecture. This occasion marks an important tradition, a gathering of minds, ideas, and inspiration to reflect on pressing issues and opportunities. Though a newborn, this lecture has served as a platform to celebrate knowledge, foster intellectual exchange, and ignite meaningful discussions that shape the future. Each edition has brought remarkable speakers, groundbreaking insights, and transformative perspectives. Today is no exception at all. As you all know, we are deeply honored to have with us none other than Padma Bhushan Dr. Kaushik Basu, Professor of Economics, Cornell University. I know that he doesn't need any kind of introduction. He is the speaker of today's evening, and he would be speaking on the topic, the global economy at a turning point, what should India do? The entire session would be presided by Srimad Swami Suparnananda Maharaj, revered secretary to the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture. But above all, before we formally get into the lecture, I would request Shri Ritendra Roy, MD Oppenheimer, to come on the stage and deliver the address of welcome, and he would also formally read out or speak something about Dr. Biren Roy and Padma Bhushan Dr. Kaushik Basu as well. Shri Ritendra Roy.
Okay, welcome everybody to the Biren Roy Memorial Lecture. It's great to see so many friends, family in the audience, and it is indeed a privilege for me to be at the Vivekananda Hall. First, my pranam to Swamiji, and I note that today is indeed an auspicious day to be here because it is the eve of Sri Shraddha Devi's birthday. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Kaushik Basu, Professor of Economics, and Karl Marx Professor of International Studies, Department of Economics, and S.C. Johnson College of Business at Cornell University. To clarify, it is Karl with a C and not Karl with a K, which would have been much more apt for this city, Dr. Basu. This talk is definitely personal to me as I get to represent the Roy family, many of whom are here in the audience or listening virtually. While it is the first time I'm meeting Dr. Basu, it also feels personal to me, Dr. Basu, since I share the twin love of Kolkata and New York and the twin pride in being a Xaverian and a Stephanian with today's speaker, Dr. Kaushik Basu. I want to introduce Dr. Basu by highlighting three areas that I believe are in common with the late Biren Roy and Dr. Basu. The first, just the sheer range of interests that both these gentlemen have. Biren Roy has directed movies, been a publisher, and written around 50 books in 3 languages on subjects as varied as drama on labor struggle, which was confiscated by the British in 1929, on radio manufacturing, the translation of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata into German, on aviation, his personal passion, yoga, and the histories of Calcutta and India. Similarly, in addition to what he is well known for, his books on economics and policymaking, Dr. Basu has translated Bengali short stories written by Shibaram Chakraborty, written a 4-act play, which I really enjoyed, The Crossing of the Benares Junction, and created an online game, which I can watch for, is super addictive, the Dui Doku. Secondly, both Dr. Basu and Biren Roy have this belief in the promise of India, and they've been really involved in policy making. Biren Roy's initial foray in policy making was local, as he established the All Bengal Municipal Association. He visited Germany in 1936 as India's sole representative to the 6th World Congress of Cities in Berlin, where he was the first Indian to fly the Congress tricolor as India's flag at the Kroll Opera House in Berlin. Post-independence, Biren's involvement in policymaking was both direct as a 4-time member of parliament, as well as covert, as he was a patron of various political leaders, and he published the CPI mouthpiece, the Swadhinata. Dr. Basu's significant impact on policymaking includes leaving the world of academia in 2009 to become Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's chief economic advisor till 2012. And then he was the chief economist to the World Bank from the period 2012 to 2016. In the Policymakers Journal, Dr. Basu shows how new ideas from the academic world play out in the world of government and politics. So I personally believe that his books, blending economic theory and his personal experience, will continue to have a lasting impact on policymaking for years to come. And third, which is my personal favorite, humanism, this search for a better world, a better way. Being here, standing in this Vivekananda hall, we are reminded of the need for a better and more equitable world. Biren Roy sought a progressive economic philosophy, likely aligning with what in modern day I would call effective altruism, given his philanthropic endeavors, which included establishing the first girls' high school in Behala, the first maternity ward in Behala, hospitals, and then donating 100% of all his assets into trusts for charity. He supported M.N. Roy in forming the Radical Humanist Party, providing him both a place to stay and hosting the first public meeting at the Roy House in Behala. The economic philosophy of radical humanism criticized Marxism as being dogmatic and believed that under parliamentary democracy, the majority in power ruled by law and not by conscience. And he really looked to focus on the working poor and the balanced social organization with individual freedom, a topic that remains relevant today. In a very similar vein, I find Dr. Basu's work draws on the capability approach to define growth, not merely in terms of material wealth, but the freedom to exercise one's capabilities and creativity. In his view, the true constituents of GDP, gross domestic product, are not just material consumption, but anything we value, such as a longer life, a better health, art, music, time for reflection, be in the presence of friends and family in a hall like this. He believes the future of global growth lies in enhancing these non-material aspects of life rather than the continued consumption of material goods. I find Dr. Basu setting an example in the way he leads his life. He is the chief mentor of Noini Ratam, a social welfare organization based in Purulia, which runs an eye care hospital and the Felix School. With that, coming to today's topic, which is global economy at a turning point, what should India do? We are really lucky to have Professor Basu at a moment when the world seems to be spinning faster than usual. To quote Vladimir Lenin, there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. Again, there are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. We seem to be at that point again. The global economy is being driven by both geopolitics and conflicts, but it is also revolving around the whims of the incoming US President, Donald Trump. The knock-on impact of Trump's elections has multiple governments in major countries in crisis. Canada is the fourth major economy to see its government in turmoil, following Germany in the past week, France earlier this month, and South Korea with the recent imposition of martial law and subsequent impeachment of the president. From a business perspective, Trump has US CEOs bending their knees to him, eager to meet him for a meal. But at the same time, the markets are cheering for deregulation and hopeful of the business opportunity to come. I really look forward to hearing from Dr. Basu what all this means from India. So without further ado, let me invite Dr. Basu to the podium to address all of you.
Swami Suparnananda Maharajji, the Managing Committee of the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture, Mrs. Shumita Roy, Probir Roy, amake invite korar jonno, ebong right now, Sri Ritendra Roy. It's an absolutely honor and a pleasure to be here. And thank you very much for the very generous introduction and for actually summarizing almost the content of my lecture in advance without quite knowing what I will cover. There will be some overlaps there. It is also very, very special that this is a lecture in memory of Biren Roy, an staggering personality, absolutely a polymath, someone who could handle virtually everything from scientific invention to political activism to the interest in flying and aeronautics. It's just amazing. And he worked very closely with Subhash Chandra Bose, with Nehru. So it is really very special for me to be giving this lecture in his memory. I should also mention that with the Ramakrishna Mission, it's a close association for me that goes back long, long back. And I've come back here repeatedly. It means a lot to me individually. And today, actually, as I was mulling through today's lecture, I remembered one of my first interactions as an economist with the Ramakrishna Mission, loosely speaking, was almost 50 years ago when I had just finished my PhD and came back over here, and it was my mother's idea that I should go to Rohora, the Ramakrishna Mission School, and give a lecture. So that was my first interaction, and this was a somewhat unusual experience because the invitation really did not come from Ramakrishna Mission Rohora. It came from my mother via the Ramakrishna Mission because she wanted me to be there to give this talk. And quite a funny thing happened. It was, my memory was going back to that. My mother came with me, spoke to the principal and kept telling the principal that I'm a very famous economist, which is utterly meaningless. I had just finished my studies and come back, but my mother kept saying that. Then the principal had absolutely no choice because my mother sat in the front row. So the principal, in trying to introduce me, kept saying that he's a very famous economist. And with my mother looking at him, he went on that he has been contributing. But finally, he had to turn to me and said, "Acha, apnar naamta ki ekটু bolben?" This is stuck in my head. I gave a very bad lecture after that. It was after that introduction. But that's my first. And I should also tell you that for me, Ramakrishna Mission, Swami Vivekananda has a very special resonance. I'm a skeptic, but I do feel a strange connection, a strange understanding of the questioning mind, of the openness, of the tolerance. That was Swami Vivekananda's teaching. It means a huge amount to me personally, and so Ramakrishna Mission, memory of Swami Vivekananda, all this for me unites together. I must begin by quoting Nehru. On 20th March, Sri Ramakrishna's birthday, 1949, giving a talk where he says, our young men should have the opportunity to get acquainted with the ideas of Swamiji. We cannot be so fortunate as to hear his voice anymore, but we can at least read what he taught and what he wrote and learn from it. You will find that even his words are packed with vigor. Whoever reads them feels their impact, unquote. Well, let me with that turn to the subject of today's talk. And as Ritendra, I'm taking advantage of the age difference to address him by first name, said, the world is in fact spinning. It's a very, very difficult situation globally. As you know, I've been living in the United States, and there are meetings after meeting, discussions after discussions in Washington, in New York, about what's happening to the global economy, what's happening to United States, and there is, of course, trouble that people are concerned about. I'm coming right now, in fact, yesterday from China, and it's just meeting after meeting on the state of the global economy, the Chinese economy, and the challenges that they are facing. It's all, most of it at a visible level happened over the last 5 years, starting with the COVID-19 pandemic, and then the Ukraine war, the Middle Eastern war. We are seeing some of their direct effects in a slightly convoluted way. It's quite interesting because some of the things that we should have been aware of, we became aware of after these troubles started. See, because of the long supply chains of products nowadays in the world, where for one commodity to be produced, it goes through many countries, many corporations, all doing little parts of it. A disruption in one point can be a global disruption. We were seeing this at the time of the COVID-19 pandemic. A factory shuts down in Taiwan or somewhere else, and you feel the pressures of that being created in the United States, in Kolkata, in Delhi, in faraway places. That's beginning to have an effect. We were seeing a ship with food not managing to leave the Ukraine area, and food prices going up in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, where of course there is a widespread poverty, and the rise in food price can be devastating for the population over there. So we've become aware of these challenges, and the supply chain disruptions are taking place even now. However, it will be wrong if we take these proximate causes, so these are the immediate causes, the COVID-19, the Ukraine, and overlook that there are deep changes taking place which is causing some of this. The deep changes are, at one level, advantageous, at another level, very troublesome, and I do want to explain this. Technological advance, digital advance, information technology, the word advance itself suggests it is progress, and indeed at one level it is progress. But it is changing the nature of economic interaction in dramatic ways, and creating problems that we may not have anticipated because of the changing nature of the economy. And I'm going to explain some of this with some detail. But the analogy that I can think of, which captures what is happening today, this does not happen regularly. Some people will say the world is always in trouble, but not quite like this. It's a deeper problem, and this happens every 200-300 years. And we are in the midst of one of those. The one which strikes me as analogy is the Industrial Revolution. From, say, roughly 1750 to 1850, 100 years of the Industrial Revolution, at one level it was advance. New machines, new technology, displacing labor, enabling children to work because the machines were so simple that children could provide their labor. it is being viewed as something which would expand global GDP. What is forgotten now is that this technological advance for the first 50 or 60 years was a period of just pure turmoil in the global economy, primarily in Europe, where the Industrial Revolution was taking place. Changes like which people were not ready to cope with. Industrial pollution. At that time, the skies would go dark. The writers would write about the bleak times, and one of my favorite artists, L.S. Lowry, painted these magical pictures of little matchstick figures going to work through smoke and cloud. That is their life. Children, little children, 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, would be working regularly for about 12 to 14 hours a day. And I take a lot of interest in that period, and there are accounts where later on when there would be investigations, these children would, to a committee, the committee member asks that working for 12 hours in a day, wouldn't you fall down? And in a matter-of-fact way, the child would say, yes, at times at the end of the day, I would fall down. That was the kind of condition in which they were working. We came out of the Industrial Revolution successfully for two reasons. And I'm stressing this because I believe today is a time when we have to turn to some of this. One is novel policy. Policies that today appear routine were born during the Industrial Revolution. Intelligent people, morally conscious people. I like the fact that Sri Ritendra mentioned the humanism and that kind of concern. That coming together with intelligence led to newer and newer policies, from Robert Peel's Act very early to a whole lot of laws that came in Britain were progressive laws that were coming in. That was one, the moral humanism part of it. The other was the intellectual part. That is also as important. And once again, I feel very comfortable speaking about these in Ramakrishna Mission because of the openness of it, that we have both humanism, but we also want science and progress. We don't want to hold back one for the other. The Industrial Revolution, in fact, in a strange way, coincides with some of the most powerful thinkers in economics. Right or wrong, historically, there were ideas you were giving birth to which in retrospect may turn out to be wrong. But right from 1776, one of the greatest thinkers, and you can probably guess who I'm talking about, Adam Smith in 1776, to someone in 1874, 98 years, Leon Walras, the grand mathematical economist. And this range with Karl Marx, John Stuart Mill, Stanley Jevons, it's peppered with ideas being born. So it's the intellectual space, understanding the world, and you know there are ideas, little things of understanding, which some of this I will give illustration when I come to talking about India, was born during this period. The combination of this saved the world, and saved in the following way. Once again, I want to pick up on this and have some optimism about today's troublesome period, is that, you know, the growth rate of the global economy, lots of people are very worried what will happen to global growth. Industrial revolution is an interesting thing because pre-industrial revolution and post-industrial revolution, dramatic change. Before the industrial revolution, global growth, the whole world, was growing at roughly 0.3% per annum. Small growth all over the world taking place. After about 100 years, Angus Maddison is the guru who computes these kinds of historical data. Maddison comes out and shows that growth rate, which used to be 0.3%, global growth had become 2.1%, which means the world was growing 7 times faster. I believe that changes of this kind, good changes, good kind of growth, and once again, I'm so glad you mentioned that the content of the growth is important. I'm going to come back to that happened with the Industrial Revolution. This is the challenge we face. Let me quickly point to a few more global things, and then I want to turn to India. I want you to understand one or two slightly technical things, but not difficult to understand. I do want to explain. Supply chain, global value chain, so much is being written about. Why is it so important? For the following reason. You know, in the old-fashioned world, when you talked about any industry, let me take the automobile industry or car industry, the way we economists would write up our model was 100 firms, 100 corporations produce cars. The guru of this is Stanley Jevons, who wrote it up and Augustine Cournot wrote up these descriptions very well. 100 firms produce cars. If one of them shuts down, 1/100th of the production will go down, prices will rise because there's a shortage, troublesome. But think of today's world. If there are 100 corporations in the automobile industry, it is a supply chain linked industry. One of them is producing the wheels, which then goes to another country, where another one is producing the gearbox, which goes to another corporation, which is producing, I don't know enough of the breakup of the automobile to give you the details, but you know different parts are being produced. 100 of them. If one of them shuts down, the entire industry will close down. Because it's all linked. One component is gone, the crucial component. So it's not just 1/100th of the production gone, but the whole production will come to a halt, which is causing a part of our political problem, which we don't fully understand, but there is concern about this. In this supply chain linked world, one country in a warlike situation and another can cut off one component and bring the entire industry to a halt. This is a big topic now politically. What do you do to make sure that the whole industry is not halted by one country as a form of war? I personally worry a little bit that one of the biggest instruments of war, unless we take action now in terms of policy, one of the biggest instruments of war into the world in which we are going in is going to be economic disruption. We are learning newer and newer methods of disrupting another country's economy, and this is going to become a very major technique that is being used by the countries. One more thing I will tell you, and then let me turn to India. The digital platform is, I find it very fascinating. You know, I'm assuming people have economics background here, some of them, but I can tell you a little bit. Adam Smith's idea that markets, how do markets work? There are hundreds and thousands of buyers. We want to buy apples, oranges. There are hundreds and thousands of sellers who want to sell apples and oranges. The market, they meet by what is called the invisible hand. Quite how they get together, Adam Smith never modeled. The invisible hand brings them together. Think of the modern world. In the old-fashioned world, people looking for a car ride would be going out looking for a taxi. Taxis looking for customers would be looking, where are the customers? They would come together by the invisible hand. But we live in a world today where the hand is no longer invisible. It is called Uber or Ola. A profit-making entity has replaced the invisible hand. The nature of the market has changed, and there's a lot of talk in the United States, and I bring it up because it is also happening in India, that some of these platforms are making mega profits because without them you can't function. The driver can't function, the customer can't function. Amazon, and there is discussion, how do we control these mega profits and the control of the market by one entity, the market maker? Very difficult topic. Many people think that antitrust laws can be used more effectively. I don't think so. You need other kinds of policies. But for today's purpose, I want to put it aside and turn to India in the middle of all this. Where is India headed? How will India handle this changing world is what I want to get into. One of the things which is affecting India in a very big way is the dropping demand for labor. Part of this is no individual country's blame. In political debates, we say it's your blame or your blame, but the truth is there is a decline in the demand for labor taking place because of the slow drift in technology. And there's plenty of data now. From rich countries, it is very clear. I can tell you some off the top of my head kinds of numbers. If you go back to 1975 and come up to, say, 2015, take the stretch of 40 years, of the national income, the fraction that is earned by workers as worker income is dropping in maybe every advanced economy. For Japan, it's a dramatic drop from 77% going to workers, it's down to 60%. For United States, it's also a pretty sharp drop. Canada, it's a sharp drop. Australia, all of them, it's falling. So the workers' share is beginning to go down. This is creating pressures for us. But I do believe that with the right policies, a country like India can handle some of the problems, at least for the next 10, 15 years, much better than we are handling now, but with a set of correct policies. After that, we will face, as India's income rises, wages rise, we will face the problem. But there are countries in the world who are navigating this current time, relatively emerging economies, pretty well. Vietnam is the striking example, but there are other examples that we will come to. Now, with this, what should we do? What are the policies that we go into? That's the question that we want to ask. And here, just a reminder that in the backdrop, I will keep some objective functions in mind, and I will come back to later. What policies you do, what kind of life you want the economy to lead, depends on what is it that you want to maximize. What should the society try to achieve? So that in game theory, we call it the payoff function. What is the payoff that you're trying to maximize? That has to be kept in mind. It sounds trivial that to decide what's the right policy, you must know what is it that you're trying to maximize. But I can tell you that the trivial has real life implications, but I'll give you a trivial example where I myself got a sudden reminder about how objectives are important. Just after I went to Cornell, and there are some Cornell people here, I should tell you in 1994 I had joined. One of the local newspapers had a tiny report saying, if you go jogging for 10 minutes, your life expectancy will go up by 8 minutes. That sounded pretty good. Half an hour of jogging one day, you live 24 minutes more. Do that every day, do that every month, your life expectancy is going up. And I started jogging regularly, like a lot of my colleagues over there. One day while jogging, I asked myself a question. What is it that I want to maximize in life? Is it the total amount of time on earth or total amount of non-jogging time on earth? If I'm trying to maximize the total amount of non-jogging time on earth, then every time I go jogging for 10 minutes, I've clipped off 2 minutes. Gone. It's becoming shorter. And I stopped jogging. After that, I've vacillated between what is it I try to maximize, vacillating, but it is important. And actually, if you do cost-benefit analysis, it can come to detailed decisions, will depend on what you want to maximize. I'll tell you one of the things, and I'll come back a bit more to policy. I do believe a country wants to grow, wants to be prosperous, but there are other things also valuable. Distribution. You want the prosperity to be shared better across societies. And there are formal measures. I'm so glad you again mentioned capabilities. The human capability is that ordinary people's capability, the kind of life you lead, not just the income, that ought to be enhanced. With that in the backdrop as the maximization aim, let me get into some specific policy matters. First of all, about a few numbers. India's overall GDP growth is good. It has dropped somewhat. You may have seen newspaper reports over the last week or so, over the 3-month period, the third quarter of this year, but growing roughly at 7% per annum. It's less than what we were doing. India's used to 8-9% per annum, but the whole world is going through a troublesome phase. So 7% per annum is pretty good growth rate. India was doing that. Short-term dip, it's dropped to 5.4% from July to September. Even then, it's a dip, but it's not bad. It's doing reasonably. So the overall growth picture, the headline picture, looks fine. But there are worries. Once you go below the headline, there are many, many worries which we have to pay attention to. And especially so because India has lots of fundamental strengths. Thanks to our early investment in education, especially higher education, scientific education, you can see Indians flourishing and doing well all over the world, from the corporate sector to research in the front line. There's enough talent in the country. We need to bring the best minds to nurture and develop it further, but there are beneath the headlines, there are worries. So the best way to describe, as I dissect it, is that headlines are good, the worries are in the fine print. That's where India stands today. And I want to get into some of the fine prints because it's utter foolishness. If we just feel good by looking at the headlines, we will do damage to ourselves. We need to go below that. And the headline, I don't doubt that. I think the headline is good, but go below that. And I want to go below that and look at some of the specific problems. I'm going to break it up into 5 areas and 5 problems that we want to look at. First of all, unemployment, especially youth unemployment, is very high. 2023 figure, India's figure given by the World Bank, depending on the data source, there's some variation, but the World Bank tries to give a kind of data where you can do cross-country comparison. India's youth unemployment rate is 15.8%, little bit higher than China's. China's is very close to that, 15.7%, much higher than Vietnam, 6.2%, much higher than Singapore, 8.3%, and also for India, 15.8% is about the highest up to 2023. It used to be much lower. It was rising for a good 15 years, but it's reached a very high level. This is causing trouble. This is causing also inequality to rise. Inequality itself is rising. Since it's a connected point, let me just mention this. India's, again, overall GDP is growing, but if you dissect it, it is really very, very skewed. And there are studies by Thomas Piketty and other people that are showing that overall distribution is not good, but if you take really the top few, top 1% or 0.1% of India and the rest, that gap has gone back to pre-1947 level, the huge gap between the absolute top and the masses. It's one of the worst situations in terms of this rise in inequality, and youth unemployment, no doubt, is hitting us on that. Inflation is not, overall is not bad, but there is one slightly technical thing, and which to most large audience I would not, but again, Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture, I will mention a slightly technical matter about inflation. India's inflation is very interesting. The current rate is something like 6.2%. High, but it's happening in many places in the world, but there is one specific problem. There are items within the overall inflation is 6.2%, but there are items like vegetables. It had gone up to 42%, now down to something like 23%, massive inflation in vegetable prices. But now look at it this way. The way we give the inflation figure, standard method of calculation, you take the national income, different goods are rising at different prices, you put weights on, do a weighted average, the weights depend on how much of the national income is spent on that. Now, vegetable, with super rich people, vegetable is a tiny fraction of India's consumption. So the vegetable price inflation gets a smallish weight in the entire inflation, and if you're doing the entire nation, that is right. But if you take the lower middle classes, even middle classes, where vegetable consumption is quite a bit, the weight is much bigger. So inflation hitting the common person is much bigger than the 6.2% because the weight on the good that they consume disproportionately is going through the roof, which again reinforces the inequality problem that we have to be mindful of. Export and trade. India ought to do much better than India's doing. India's export figures, I will tell you a little bit. Export to GDP ratio in 1998 was 10%. Total export to GDP is 10%. 2006, it doubles. It becomes 20%. 2013, 25%. Since then, it's falling again steadily. It's down to about 20%. But at this stage, when China was at this stage, China's export to GDP was something like 35%. Vietnam now is 40% export to GDP. India should have been much higher, but from 2013, it's falling. And there are policy mistakes taking place, tiny ones. I don't think there is any deep intrigue in the policy mistakes, but the best minds are not being marshaled for this. I'll tell you one of the things that is happening. Some key inputs into India have very heavy tariffs. The justification for tariff is we are protecting the local industry. But if key input prices go up, exports where those goods are used, the exports get disadvantaged. And in the garment sector, there are analysis being done which shows that there are some critical inputs that you need for certain kinds of garments. Those are very high priced because we are putting a tariff on that. So exports are not managing to take off. This causes a problem. Bringing the economics is a very strange subject where some parts of it are common sense and intuition, but there are other parts which are as precise as engineering. You need mathematics, you need analysis. I'll give you one example of a dramatically simple case where you solve an economic problem almost like a maths problem. I'll explain it without any maths. And I'm bringing this up because there was an example of this use. I'm going back to the time when I was in government. One of the first auctions for a major product in India was 3G spectrum auction. How you sell a product to industry is very often mired in corruption. Someone pays through the side, you give it to that firm or that corporation. Whereas a well-designed auction can clean it up and can give the government a lot of money. And this was done, the credit I did go championing. I went repeatedly that time to see the Prime Minister and said that we can't go the old-fashioned way. Auctioning is done in the United States like a building of a bridge through mathematical models. We should go the auction route, and that was done. The spectrum auction, one part of the 3G spectrum which we sat in government and calculated, bureaucrats calculating, this is $7 billion. So if we had sold it, we would have sold it for $7 billion. When we did the auction, the government raised $15 billion, $8 billion more through a well-designed auction. I must give you, this is almost like a school algebra of how auctions can be beautifully done, but it needs the mind. I'll give you the following example. Take a very simple auction, the standard auction, where people write down what they are bidding for it secretly, secret ballot on that, you get all the bids, you open it up and give it to the person who bid the highest. Okay, so take for instance a piece of art. Let us say that this is a piece of sculpture and we want to auction it. If we get a whole lot of people and everyone has the value, I value it at $1,000, someone else values it at $100. When people are sitting down and we tell them, write down the number, what is the maximum you're willing to pay, people typically won't write the highest number. You write much lower and hope that everyone else will write a lower number. You'll get it for a lower price than your full value. The problem of auctions is people don't reveal the maximum that they value. It looked like an unsolvable problem till a man called Vickrey, V-I-C-K-R-E-Y, came into economics and gave birth to a new kind of auction called a second price auction. It's simple enough, so just listen to the way these second price auctions work. Get the crowd of room full of people, tell everyone to write down the price you're bidding. Then you will get this by the following rule. The person who wrote the highest bid will get it and will pay the price of the second highest bidder. As soon as you make this the rule, and this I will leave it to you as homework, I'm treating it as a classroom, think through, it's in your self-interest to write down the maximum you're willing to pay. A Vickrey auction makes people reveal the maximum they are willing to pay, they write down. It's a simple technique that is used. There are many different kinds of auctions nowadays, depending on what you're trying to do. But auction theory, a lot of it is like engineering. You do these detailed analysis and you decide how you do the auction. Lot of scope for this. And India used to be in the forefront of using many techniques that were being brought in, not enough now. And finally, one more problem that I want to talk about, and then talk to some challenges of policy making. Of how do we handle these? No clear answers, but what I'm stressing is we have to bring the best minds, and I'll give you one or two things. One more area, which is where India's not doing too well, which will hurt India's growth rate. In fact, my worry is next year's growth rate could go down even further, and prices could rise even further quite soon. One indicator which we economists observe with great care is the savings rate and the investment rate. So if you take the entire national income, the fraction of that that is saved, which is very close to the fraction of that which is investment, invested in factories, in railroad, etc. The savings rate in India used to be historically low, but savings rate is very closely associated with a country's growth rate, especially for developing countries. Lot of evidence and lot of, again, formal analysis of the relationship between the two going back to a very long time. India's savings rate and investment rate used to be low historically, and the East Asian countries, which used to be super fast growing countries and economies like South Korea, like Japan, China, all had very, very high savings rate, investment rate, 35%, 40%, and growing very rapidly. India's savings rate used to be historically very low. It began picking up towards the end of 1980s, but by 2003, India crossed over into 30% savings and investment rate. First time looking good. Over the next 7-8 years, by 2008, India is saving and investing about 39% of its GDP, which is like the East Asian super growing countries, and India's growth is phenomenally high. That time 8.5%, 9% India's growing. After that, from about 2011, the savings rate have started coming down slightly, savings and investment rate. Now it is down to around 30%. So from about 39% down to 30%, this has happened fairly steadily. I don't think these are getting enough attention. We are so hung up on headlines, one headline, GDP will be massive, that things beneath that are not getting attention. So for the common people, it is becoming a situation almost like a recession hitting you while the GDP is still continuing to grow very well. What do you do about this? I'll end by getting into a couple of policy matters where I think we ought to pay attention. There is no clear solution. There are some matters on which I do have specific ideas, but not really meant for a lecture. It'll be boring for you if I get into details. But also, I must say, and this is not humility, this is realism. For many of these problems, we don't immediately have a solution. But at least if you admit that these things are going wrong, we will not live by headline alone, but look into the fine print of what's happening in the economy. There is enough brain power in India. If you marshal that, you can begin to grow, but I'm afraid too little of the marshalling of talent that is taking place. Slogans are beginning to swamp our life. Here are a couple of things I'll get into. One on which I have a specific suggestion. You know, when China grew rapidly, the manufacturing sector was swallowed by China. The world's manufacturing hub was China, everything. Gradually, China's wages began rising as China is becoming better off. People are becoming better off. Labor is more costly. There was expectation that India's garment sector, for instance, would come and occupy its space. India did not do that. The garment sector did not flourish. Bangladesh's garment sector overtook India much more. Smaller country, but was doing much better. But I think there is a specific reason to it. Complicated reason, but I want to explain this to you. Something to do with labor laws, the way the labor laws are drafted. And this again brings up, at first sight, some of these labor laws look very pro-labor, but when you look more carefully, they may not be helping labor. I'll give you an example. And I believe we are at a juncture where India needs to reform India's labor laws very carefully. Because in the name of doing it for the workers, it's very easy to do it in a way where you're just helping the industrialists. You must not do that. But we do need a change. The labor law that causes problem is the Industrial Disputes Act of 1947. It goes back, by the way, to before 15th August. So it was a pre-independence law, the Industrial Disputes Act of 1947. It puts one restriction on firms. Big firm with 100 workers, in some states it's 300 workers, but most of them 100 workers, which is not a very big firm. If you have more than 100 workers, if you want to downsize, cut down some of your workforce, you have to go to the government to get permission. The law requires. Governments typically don't give permission. They are nervous about giving permission, whatever be the reason, they don't. So Indian firms are stuck with this, and this is sold as a pro-labor policy. Look, firms can't downsize their workforce. But when I was in government, I would repeatedly face this problem. Some people would come from the garment industry, and I think quite genuinely, saying that, there is a fashion for a new kind of clothing in New York, in America, for which we have the skill. We can flood the American market with this product, but my problem is I'll have to expand my work size. For 2-3 years, the fashion runs, we do very well, but then I may need to downsize when the demand for that goes, but government of India won't allow me. I'll be stuck with the labor force. This, I think, is causing a problem, and you will have to allow, at the first sight, it does look as if you're going against the interest of labor, and you have to take precautions, and the precautions are important because there is a historic mistake that has taken place of changing this labor law in a very bad way. There is a very good example of that. Since it's a 1947 law, sorry? Ajay, you're going across. Yeah. Since it's a 1947 law, pre-independence, no surprise, Pakistan was born with the same law as India. Prevention, the Labor Law, Industrial Disputes Act. Pakistan, around 1957 or 58, was having trouble managing its jute workers in Bangladesh. So in a completely ruthless way and very poor quality, they got rid of the law, which is a warning that I'm not saying get rid of labor laws. You do need labor laws. Labor workers need protection. Pakistan got rid of it very poorly, and Pakistan's economy has done very poorly. Bangladesh had one very strange advantage. Bangladesh is born in 1971 without that labor law, because Bangladesh is being born out of Pakistan, so the labor law is gone. Bangladesh put together labor laws protecting labor rights. Still, Bangladesh needs to do much more, but it was a revamped labor law. Bangladesh garment firms are much bigger than Indian ones because that worry has gone, and it began to swamp the global market. I feel if India's labor laws, 1947 Act, is reformed very carefully. I have seen this with the agricultural food supply laws. In the name of doing it well, it was being handed over to middle businesses. That you must not do. You have to do it very carefully, keeping the workers' enlightened interest in mind, but this is a place where we need action. Inequality control, we do need. Inequality is going just too high. Over here, again, you have to be realistic. Two things to be kept in mind. I'm an economist. I'm very aware that a certain amount of inequality is a part of life. You want that incentive for people to work hard, enterprise to be rewarded, but not the level of inequality that we have today. It's unacceptably high. I do believe that a time will come when future generations looking back at today's inequality will be shocked that we tolerated this level of inequality, the level that we are seeing today. On this also there are problems that some of the action you need global coordination, but India can do much more than what we are doing. As I said, PKT's data shows that if you take the complete top end, very few firms with the rest, it's back to colonial times is the way India's looking. We should not be there. We need to begin to correct this. Something which sounds like not economics at all, but I must bring it up. I think it does affect the economy. Pollution. The skies, Delhi, Calcutta, we need to clean it up. And in the long run, and not even very long run, it can begin to hurt the economy. Years ago, Dr. Manmohan Singh, much before he became Prime Minister, I remember a casual meeting where he was saying, those days India had a problem of clean drinking water. People would come and immediately you get some stomach problem because the water is not good. And he casually said that for India to really grow and do well, and foreign investors coming in, bringing in, minimal requirement is we need clean drinking water so that people don't feel uncomfortable about that. They come in and go out. It's a trivial side remark, but I think there is something to that. People need to feel comfortable. The pollution problem is at a level where if it gets any worse, and it doesn't even have to, there are people who are beginning to worry coming in. You can't have that. One example on this is that it can be cured, but it needs a national level effort. Whoever does it will go up as a hero. So I feel it should be in the self-interest of politicians to try to deliver on this. China is a striking example. This time when I went, Beijing, I went back after a long time. After about 10 years, I went back to Beijing. Dramatic improvement in pollution. But it's a massive effort. Money is needed, lot of decision-making details. But to see a big city having such a dramatic improvement, it's quite remarkable. Cities like New York, bustling cities, but much cleaner air. I feel it is entirely doable. We have the scientific talent, we can borrow money for some time. Cleaning this up is going to make a big difference to the quality of life and even to economic growth. I feel this should be on a war footing. One more is education. Historically, India's education system has had one very big strength, one very big weakness, and I'm going back to the 1950s, 60s. The very big strength is India's top end of the education, colleges, IITs, IIMs, universities, very, very good, excellent. And this I keep saying every time, which is true, that early days when I used to work at the Delhi School of Economics, teaching in Delhi, would occasionally go to international conferences. I felt that the Indians at these conferences were as comfortable as the Europeans and the Americans. They would dominate, but for Indians we were as comfortable because our higher education was so good. That was a very comfortable feeling going into that setting. We knew we were no less. India's higher educational achievement was phenomenal for a long time, but there was one weakness right from the beginning. Basic literacy was low, so it was a very dual system. We need to correct this, and higher education, I'm worrying a little bit, is that we've got the private universities doing very well, but we can't just rely on that. Much more investment needs to go into the state-run universities, to schools and colleges, because the heart of the modern world is going to be education. As technology comes in, displaces labor, mechanical labor is going to go. But creative labor will retain its space for quite some time. After that, it's another world we'll be entering, but in the immediate run, the space is going to be for creative minds. And we had an advantage in this. We have to give much greater emphasis on education. State money has to come into education to push it further forward. And one more sector is health. I feel health also needs a lot of attention, and we could even get things like, both for health and education, not only improve our own quality, but India can be a potential business hub of people coming to India to get education and then going back to their countries. People coming to India for health and going back is possible. Today, for instance, China, despite the disadvantage of language, because they struggle to use English, but in medical education, people are coming from all over the world, going to China, getting educated and going back to different countries. India, with a natural advantage in English, because of, for good or for bad reasons, it's a historical thing. We can occupy a space over here, preparing our own population with first-rate education and people coming from different parts of the world to get education here, and similarly for health. I want to just close by not talking of economy, but just one word about society and humanism, and I'm glad you had brought it up. You know, we don't live by economics alone. Life is about many other things, about the quality of life, about shared values, and I do believe that a certain amount of basic moral code, and by moral code I'm not even saying that you follow a religion or follow a particular belief. It's basic morals of goodness, kindness. These are great values, of trusting, of being trustworthy. And again, I feel good saying this in Ramakrishna Mission, because this is the place that nurtures this. We need that in society. First, there are two things to it. I feel if you develop these, it also does boost economic growth. Francis Fukuyama has this study of societies which nurture trust and trustworthiness have become better off in the long run. But we have to remember that some of these values of humanism, of basic moral code, are worthwhile whether or not it helps the economy. These are human values, and we as human beings want to nurture these values, and we must push towards that. India must be an open, tolerant society nurturing some of these good values. I don't have to say this in the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture, because it is a place that plays a role, but I'm glad I got this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Professor, Professor Kaushik Basu has concluded his speech with a high hope of developing a sense of moral values that we at Ramakrishna Mission have been holding on very assiduously. But I will tell you that we have been doing it in a much more concerted way and in a more elevated way. That point if get chance at the end of my speech, I would elaborate. But right now, I request the audience to give hint to their opinions, and Professor Basu would be very much eager to answer some of your queries from here itself. Microphone is going.
My question is about the Office of Foreign Assets Control and its activities in sanctioning states. Sorry, am I not audible? Activities in concerning states with whom India is at least very vehemently.
Not audible, please come closer.
Am I audible now?
No, he won't come.
Okay, I'll drop the mic.
Maybe that's better.
So India of late has been developing its equations with OFAC controlled states. It always had a very good relationship with the likes of Iran and Russia. But in the economic parameters and the broader economic disruption, is that a sustainable economic measure in the next decade itself? Because we know that sanctions are balance sheet busting and can kill nations.
Sustain.
Should I take a few questions? No, I think when it comes to international relations and diplomacy, one reason why it is a professional subject is you have to be careful. In case you're aligning with a party that is being sanctioned globally, you have to make up your mind. Do you want to do that and stay with that and take the sanctions or not take it? But again, for India, it is possible to rise to a position where India sets some of those standards. If you remain a weak economy, you'll have to take the standards being set elsewhere. But India's in a position where India can rise to a level where India sets some of those standards and gets that freedom. And once again, I want to stress, we must not do it with a hyper-nationalistic mindset that all we want to do is be economically powerful ourselves. Other countries, other human beings matter as much as us. Someone suffering from malnutrition in sub-Saharan Africa is as much a tragedy as not having growth over here. So if India does rise to such a position, I hope India will do it with that enlightened sense.
Sir, I am Professor Rajesh from University of Delhi. I would like to know your opinion about the impact on economy of India today with the functioning of the parliament, as we are seeing the last 3 weeks, and the inter-religious fights going on every day in most of the cities.
It is not audible.
Maybe without that, if you say,
Yes,
and I can summarize your question to the audience.
sorry. My question is that how this economy is going to be impacted of India with the functioning of parliament in the last 3 weeks and earlier, and the inter-religious fights going on every day in most of the cities.
See, with inter-religious fights going on, how will the economy function? I can't say I'm endlessly optimistic that we will get over every problem. But one hopes that it's the leadership that provides that role, that brings the people together, that dampens down these inter-religious conflicts. If that does not happen, it may be a pessimistic route that we are heading towards, but the little bit of hope that comes has to come from the leadership.
May I ask you one question?
Make use of this.
Instead, political influence by the opposition, corruption, nepotism, does they affect this economical growth, and how to solve it?
Now, you see, there are many problems which are not solvable. If you, for instance, if you tell me that buildings fall down because of gravity, is it solvable? The answer is no. Gravity will pull and it will fall down. So if nepotism and these things are a part and parcel, then it is like gravity. You have to live with it. The hope comes from the fact that there are many areas of volition, and there are leaders who have that volitional space that will do something. But I don't want to be foolish and say that it's always going to be the optimistic end. There are tragedies which take place with nature, and some of human tragedies could take exactly that form. If nepotism and corruption is a complete part and parcel of human character, then we are done for, I'm afraid.
Sir, India being a largely dependent country on the agro side, the agro-based economy, we do have a lot of culture waste in the agricultural sector, which can be recycled to make different products, and which is also a sustainable development target-based thing. So how India is going to make it plans within the next 5 years or 10 years of time, such that the things can be made into the optimum usage. And another thing is that the blue economy, which India is trying to get into its foothold, the blue economy, the ocean economy, the utilization of the oceanic products, the blue economy or the oceanic bloom. So without our sustainable management and conservation policies for the marine biodiversity, are we being on the verge of making it to be a great potential achievement in the future? And apart from that, there is one thing relevant, the pink revolution, basically based on the enormous production of the meat to substantially transform it to other countries, to transfer it to other countries. Is India making a pace in that thing?
You know, it's the echo is making it a bit difficult for me to get the details, but broadly, if I got it right, agriculture and food, this is the situation over here in India. I can tell you a little bit. A disproportionate amount of Indian workforce is in the agricultural sector. The agricultural sector, as part of GDP, produces now a very small part, but a disproportionate amount of workers are in that sector, and this has been the case for quite some time. The reason is that with the difficulty of finding jobs, etc., in the industrial sector, they end up over there. One problem, again, below the headline is the percentage of workers in the agricultural sector in the last 3-4 years has gone up a little bit, which should not have happened because the production remains low. That's a sign of trouble in the industrial sector. The agricultural sector, food, sustainability, oceans, those are extremely important. We have to pay attention to. But if you're looking at just the economy of India, the manufacturing sector to me is also vital. A country with low-priced labor as currently has to pay attention to that. Yes, sustainability is of course critically important, but if we continue to ignore the manufacturing sector, we will have deeper and deeper problems with the economy.
I have one point. We have developed so many IITs, NITs, and universities. But now the question we should ask ourselves, what product or process we have developed after the independence so that whole world has accepted those products and processes. This is quite miserably low, in my opinion. I want to get your opinion.
You see, the quality of education in India, higher education, is actually pretty high. Pretty good quality. The IITs are very, very recognized. We have to be careful. We are expanding the numbers. You want to keep up the standard. But overall contribution even to the world, and you can literally see by looking around the world, the presence is large, which is a contribution of this. Where India's failing took place, and you have to admit that in education, is the mass basic education was not good enough. There was a period when India was trailing sub-Saharan Africa in terms of basic literacy. That shouldn't have happened. But I also worry a little bit higher education. In recent years, the quality is dropping. It's being left to the few private universities to do well. We have to build up these places where India was once really in the front line. I'm thinking of a specific example, Indian Statistical Institute. Some of the techniques that were being used to collect data by using statistical methods, which go back to Prashanto Mahalanobis, randomized collection of data, India was a global pioneer. We need to nurture these institutes in India, which are state-run with government funding. The way they were doing earlier, we have to bring them back to that state, but there have been major contributions by this.
Sir,
Only these four, no more.
actually, you are talking about the downsizing of labor force. If the contract doesn't come, then the labor force will be curtailed down. Will it not be, in long run, affect our society because there is no stability in their employment or their earning, and that will make a vicious effect in our society?
Yeah, it's a good question, and that is really the concern there. But if you make a law, take the extreme case that you can't cut any workers, the way the firms will react is they will not employ workers. A new entrepreneur starting up will not employ. If you know that, then you have to forever be stuck with them. So if you are interested in workers and the demand for workers to increase, you have to give the firms the opportunity to expand and also to contract when the global demand for the product falls. Otherwise, you're going to hurt workers in the long run.
Good evening, sir. We are here from St. Anandram Jaipuja College. We are undergrad students from both first, second and third year. So my question to you is, what is your advice to the young economist students who are looking forward in the horizon of economics on the skills and the approach we should enhance upon in order to solve the persisting global crisis in which India plays a very important role? How can we as economists or students of economics can contribute to this problem? Thank you, sir.
You've asked a big question. So, yeah. You know, I mean, as I said in my talk, economics is a very strange subject where parts of it are very technical, parts of it are intuition and understanding. And my advice will be very simple. You do have to learn some of the techniques. So algebra, calculus, etc., statistics, which are the foundations of economics, you have to learn. But do it with an open mind. Don't get locked into the assumptions you learn in textbook and assume that the whole world is going to run like that. So just reading everyday newspapers, getting in some of the facts along with that basic training is the best way to prepare for it. But life is full of uncertainties, and after that, you get into the world and take on the challenge.
Can I add one thing?
Yes.
Just seeing Biren Roy and your example, I really want to stress the interdisciplinary aspect of your life. You're not just an economist. You're interested in arts, you're interested in values, you're interested. So I think at least in my view, if I see the successful economists, they're not just doing one thing. They have this interdisciplinary, and the world's changing. So I think you guys will need to know what AI's impact is. You guys will need to know technology. So I would emphasize that aspect as well as something important.
And as you do that, I'm also stressing, actually that's very important. People have talked about how economics is embedded in other things, and nowadays I interact with the philosophy group a lot. And actually the interface between some hard parts of economics, game theory and philosophy, absolutely fascinating. So the broader perspective is very, very important. Thank you.
I think this is the last question.
I was supposed to be.
Good evening, sir. Thank you so much for your talk. I am by no means an economist, and so we had met a couple of years ago when you were lecturing at my college in the US in Cornell. And sir, I studied art history over there, and forgive me for my naivete when I ask you this question. You mentioned we could take examples from China as well. Now in China, historically, as I have seen it, as I have read also, there has been a lot of competition that has been encouraged amongst the various cities or the provinces over there. leading to the growth of over 28 megacities in China. My question is, sir, in such a scenario where in our country we don't only have the tier 1 cities but also the tier 2 cities, there's more cities rising, what would you say would be the role of allowing people to invest in government bonds of these particular states, competitive nonetheless, different rates in different states, the states competing against each other? With government bonds, people investing in the government bonds leading to infrastructural growth. So I would like to know that, sir, how that can be played into the future policy of the country as well, in terms of allowing for the growth, in terms of allowing for the betterment of manufacturing, etc., in the country.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, my Grinnell visit I remember very well. I better not give you bond investment advice, but I can more generally talk about it, that China has done that very well, sort of development across, and by creating very unusual power relations between local governments. But these things you have to do very, very carefully, because China also is an example of some of these policies backfiring in dramatic ways. I'm thinking of historically going back to 1959, 1960, the Great Leap Forward was a change in relationship in the agricultural sector broadly, and it caused one of the biggest recorded famines in the world. So you do want to create these incentives. You have to, again, the design of these, the details are extremely important. You have to sit down, you have to draft it, and in India the scope for its spreading from the big cities to smaller cities and really tiny cities across the country is very large, and we have to nurture that.
I think we're going to end the Q&A session, Maharaj. We are mindful of the time. So, Maharaj, we are done, right, from our Q&A? Do it, please. Last question. Sorry.
Good evening, sir. I am a 5th SEM undergraduate economics honors student of Ashutosh College. Sir, I wanted to ask a question. You mentioned that at present in India, there is a problem that the headlines are given more importance rather than the underlying actual data. Now, given for the last few years in India, we see that reliable data not coming, or whenever a data is published, it is being dismantled that it's not correct. So as an economics student and in general as citizens, future citizens, how can we judge how much reliable are the data and how can we analyze the data for the growth of our country?
The data deterioration in India is a very clear thing that is happening. And also, which is a bit sad, because India stood out for the quality of data globally. I worked for 4 years in the World Bank, and we would get data pouring in from all over the world. And for a developing country, and I don't even have to qualify saying developing country, India's data was first rate, the statistical methods used. But I talk to people, data is going down. And one of the reasons data quality is going down is because our tendency just to have the headlines and not give the breakdown, which will show some of the problems. Once you begin to do this headline game, you are doing a big amount of damage to a strength, which is the data, and that is very unfortunately happening. All one can do is hope that we will not do so much damage to our own heritage, where the country was in the global front lines.
Good evening, sir. My question is that regarding inequality, basically in our country, financial market is highly polarized. That's why Ambani, Adani, one day you can see that their wealth has increased manifold. Second day it has fallen down manifold. Thomas Piketty has not looked on this matter. Another thing is that even in South Korea, today they have so much improved. They have got Samsung, Daewoo, Hyundai, they got a lot of help from the government. So if our government try to help Tata, Ambani or Adani, what is wrong in it? And another thing, from 1990, if you see, our entrepreneur has taken down the growth itself, private entrepreneur, not so much as government, but India's private market and at the same time financial market is so improved that they have taken up the growth itself.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you do that, have the government nurture a few who go through the roof, well, you could end up also like Putin and the cronies, 3-4 big businesses, which captures the whole country. You can end up like Philippines, where Marcos and a few people captured. And Middle East is full of examples of that. Ben Ali in Tunisia just nurtured a few big businesses, crashed the country. So once you begin to play this game, government with a few big businesses, and this won't be more than 2-3 big businesses, when I interact with anything below this, there's a lot of anxiety. I feel you're playing a game where you're much more likely to crash the country and uphold a few cronies, which has happened in some, than helping the whole country. To help the country, you need a relatively neutral presence at the top that is interacting with big industries, small industries, with a certain amount of fairness, without this kind of connection, which is a crony capture, which does, in the end, does a lot of harm to society.
Now kindly bear with me. I won't detain you for long. So my thoughts are very much limited, not in the stock, but I will give you only a very small idea. You have been listening to a beautiful speech by Dr. Basu on the global economy at a turning point. What should India do? I think you have found an idea. And the idea is that there is not a single country which is happy. It is very much evident that every country is reeling under dire poverty, inequality. Not only that, strife, disbelief, and most importantly, they are suffering from acute competition. Not a single case of cooperation among the countries, among the nations, you discover. But these are not the subjects for economics to study. This is the big, and politics also. Politics and economics, they are meant for economic development, and they consider that we people, we are only the economic individuals and political individuals and nothing else. But one point is very much clear, that they are out to serve the people. But the goal of politics is to serve people. The goal of the economists is to serve the people. But when Professor Bose was telling you that this is the platform from where the Indian value systems and also the moral values are being preached, he has spoken half of the truth. It is not the full truth. We speak out to you about the real goal of your life, the human life. The real goal is not to amass wealth, not to have the maximum amount of satisfaction out of the consumption of the sophisticated articles and goods, but to live in full cooperation with others. That cooperative aspect is completely vanished. And you all know, it is a very famous line, but I have doubt that the agnostics, skeptics, they would listen to me and listen to the age-old sermons of our country. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that you have to serve people, looking upon them as the veritable manifestations of Shiva. Shiva Jnani Jivo Seva. Economists and politicians, they are serving people and thinking that people we serve are only economic or political in nature. That's the only defect in them. You need not have to become religious, but obviously you have to be spiritual. You have to be spiritual because you have a spirit within, which you cannot deny. You have a body, physical body. In the waking state you feel that, and you can isolate your mind from your body in the dream state. When you are dreaming, your body is lying on the bed still, but you get out of your body and create a new world and enjoy and suffer. Is it not true? But when your body is not there in your mind, in you, you still remain in mind. You can isolate your mind. And probably there may be one or two, or may not be even one single man present over here who can see in dream his own body lying in his room dead. His relations are wailing, sitting around. Maybe. If there be any having such a dream, he is having the best dream in his life, because he has this idea that he is not the body, he has a body. Yes, we have a body. And Swamiji says, I can see my body. When I see it, I cannot see my mind. When I see my mind, I cannot see my spirit. When I see my spirit in deep sleep, I cannot see either my body or my mind. But that spirit is the truth that has to be realized. That is the goal. And the goal is that. But the path leading to that goal is cooperation, concerted effort on our part. Those who are in sleep, those who have the sleep, they are all divine. Because in sleep we are all one. We are all one. There is no difference. We are all one with the purity or divinity. It is beyond mind. It is beyond your body. But that is real. That has to be attained. How? By taking to fair activities. Long ago, Lord Buddha also explained. He gave us this idea, Sammak Ajib. Make your livelihood, make your jivika, your occupation pure. Purify your occupation. Then you have purified your mind. And when your mind is purified, you have a pure intellect. And in the pure intellect will reveal the pure or Shuddha Atman or spirit. You can deny religiosity, this ritual that we perform, but you cannot deny your spirit. You are one with it. So there is no difference between a poor man and a rich man. No difference between a weak man and the strong man. No difference between the educated and the uneducated. No difference between the virtuous and the vicious. Ultimately, we are all one, because those who are sleeping, in sleep, we transcend all these barriers and we are one. We are Shivas. It is not an imagination. You need not have to intellectually convince that we are all Shivas. you are truly sleepers because in deep sleep, you simply do not know with what you are one. So let us be imbued with this, the spirit, knowledge of the spirit. When you have purified your job, you do your job properly well, and you adopt no unfair means in doing that, not even dream, then you can have that sort of pure mind, reflecting on pure buddhi, intellect, intuition, and then my spirit. So when you are in the waking state, why don't you look upon each and every one as the manifestation of that divine and serve them? Serve them. It is not the duty of the state, duty of the government to enforce fraternity, equality, freedom, this and that. You give them freedom. When you suffer from food, you feel its pinch. When others are suffering from a morsel of food, you turn your eyes back. Why? When you suffer physically, when you catch a disease, you rush to the doctor. When somebody comes to you, go, give me 1,000 rupees as help. I will have to see a doctor. They have demanded it. You say no, you go away. We have become selfish, utterly selfish. So how can you, Professor Basu, how can you accommodate unselfishness with your economic and political issues? That's the issue. That's the issue, very much urgent. And I would request you to read at least the 4 lectures that Swamiji gave in London. Please go through this. He gave it in English, translations are also there. You have completely a different outlook on your own life. Feel the sufferings of others. Atmopamena sarvatra samang pashyati yorjuno sukhang va jadi va dukkhang sa yogi paramo mato. This one sloka from the Bhagavad Gita can change the whole spectrum of life of the world. Atmopena sarvatra samang pashyati yorjuno. So if other sufferings and others' happiness are your happiness, if there is such one person, then he is the greatest of all yogis. So you do work outside with this attitude, Shiva Jnana Jiva Seva, and then you come back home, sit in the corner of your house and sit for meditation, and you will have the feel of that tranquil mind. And have that samadhi which Swamiji had, which Sri Ramakrishna had, which his disciples had, and which many of the saints and sadhus of India they had. This is the message of India. We have the best economists, we have the best statisticians, all exported. We have best education given to the students, but they are not been able to receive any jobs. Jobs are scanty, job seekers are plenty. What's the solid picture that we have been all seeing? The family structure breaking down. Marriage has almost failed. It's lost its sanctity. We have no stable family right now. These are all for excessive stress on economic and political ideas percolating among us. So it is a different kind of attitude that I have just spelled out to you for thinking, because you are all well-meaning people. You are all intellectuals, maybe soaked in skepticism, agnosticism, this and that. But I would request you, forget all about it. Moral values, These are all lower values. Moral values pertain to only your mind and intellect. It cannot penetrate into the very depth of your being, spirit. With these few observations, if you feel these are all pertinent, try to cooperate with others and forget all about competition. This is the message that India gave out long ago. And our economists, our people living outside India, should show this in their own living. When they live there, they should imperceptibly preach this Indian ideology. But here is a stable family, living together with all, serving, cooperating with all. They have a spiritual life. They will let you know that they have some religious principles. They do not have to observe even outside their feeling. So try to feel oneness of existence. We are all one. In sleep, we can transcend all polarities. We are all only one. Try to feel for others and serve them. Their sufferings are your sufferings. You have the blessings of your spirit, of your forefathers. Thank you. Namaste.